So this is the title. You should know about your speaker. I mean, on the one side, somebody thinks I don't need an introduction. On the other, I love Albert Einstein's quote, "I have no special talents, I'm just passionately curious." You'll see why this is the case. So I am not an engineer, and I started down this road before Google. And so when I was born, we had no electric typewriters, no cell phones, no internet, no calculators, rotary phones, and I did inorganic chemistry in college with a slide rule. So it's quite remarkable, given Moore's law, that I'm here talking to you about digital anything. I have some conflicts here. It's very important you understand that I will show you some things here, and you should take that with a grain of salt because of my confirmation bias. I would also mention to people, we're having a program at the San Diego Shoulder Institute and the Codman Shoulder Society on digital healthcare, where many of the companies will be coming. And while I know most of you, probably none of you will come, this will be posted to ViewMedi after the fact. But we will go through the entire episode of care with AI and VR and MR, and don't forget immersive VR. And so let's consider what we do as surgeons as a digital episode. If we look at preoperative planning, which is strategy, intraoperative execution, which is what you do, what we've been talking about, and then the aftercare. I will not talk about the aftercare. This has to do with telemedicine and digital health, though I have a lot of opinion on this too. But instead, we will focus on 3D planning, AI planning, then conversion to mixed reality, and I'll briefly talk about augmented reality, and I won't really say much about robots, though we can have a conversation about that. Now, my entire lens is through my experience in business. These are some of my professors, and each of them sort of helped me understand a bit, maybe how should we define innovation, how do we measure it, and what does it have to do with value? So Einstein, when he talked about innovation, said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And I would submit to you, I'm going to show you some innovators. They had great imagination, and most were not academics. So if you look at these individuals who have influenced the world, not just shoulder, but John Charnley and Reinhold Gans, Paul Gramont, etc., all of these people changed the course of the way we operate. And very few of them, if any, I don't think really any, were academic players. And I know Gans was, but his hip preservation ideas came after he was done with mostly his academic career. So my personal experience, I've had a journey here with two companies, and again, I told you I have a conflict of interest. It was, for me, the greatest pleasure of my career to work with my French friends and develop something called Imiscap that became Blueprint. And then, of course, I've been with ViewMedi since the early days, and I'm on the board there. But I have an open mind, and the reason I come to these meetings is because, you know, intelligence and innovation is not one specific country. And most of my successes have been collaborating with individuals from other countries. So let's go from the beginning. Codman was an innovator. First anesthesia record, first book in English on the shoulder, tumor registries, and first use of radiography for fractures. But we all know Neer, innovated many things, but he did it at a time when there were low regulatory barriers and the hospital was not a barrier and cost wasn't such a big issue. Now, I show you anterior chromioplasty because this was an innovation that turned out to be not really an innovation. Of course, Charnley I mentioned, and William Harris was in private practice when he created cross-linked polyethylene, which certainly created value because it reduced the cost and reduced the cost in terms of durability. We all know Paul Gramont. He was greatly criticized early in his career, but he changed everything we do. And then Reinhold Gans, I want to just dwell on for a minute because I was on the jury that selected him as the winner of the Lifetime Achievement Award in innovation. And it's important to understand a little bit of this. When I went to Harvard Business School, this magazine was in our room, in our common room where we lived, and it says the hard truth about innovation, 1 part creativity and 1 part discipline. I'm not so sure that's the correct formula for us. So I'll talk a little bit about innovating value in the context of digital. And from Codman, we went to Michael Porter, who's been very interested in value-based care. And so before I get to digital, let's talk about what we think value is, because it's something different for each person. The patient only cares for the outcome. In most instances, they don't pay for the service, or nominally so. The government wants control, and insurers in the hospital, they want cost reduction, they want time, how long will it take you, and they want resources. And then, of course, if you're the surgeon, you want outcome and you want income. And when you add this all up and you try to align, you realize this fortune cookie says that wasn't chicken. And so we're talking about value. We don't know what we're talking about or who we're talking about. So there are 3 tiers of value. One is the outcome initially after the surgery. Maybe that's 2-year, 3-year follow-up. One is the time for recovery. Do we give them a better recovery experience? And the thing we don't do a very good job of is measuring sustainability. And that's because it's difficult to get adequate follow-up on our patients. Thomas Crummell is co-director of the Center for Surgical Innovation at Stanford, and he pointed out that medical knowledge is what changes things, even if we resist it early on. And he went on to say, a scientist seeks understanding, an inventor seeks a solution, and an innovator seeks an application. An entrepreneur seeks independence, autonomy, and control to maximize the likelihood of success in a risky venture and an uncertain or ill-defined venture. And that sounds a lot like a surgeon, because most of us are up here saying how we would innovate. So the message I have for you is surgeons ignore technology advancement at their own peril. You want to be early to the game, not late. So how do we innovate here? And how are we measuring our innovation? Because value is outcome, inclusive of patient complications and experience, divided by cost. And so Einstein said learning is everything, learning is experience, everything else is just information. So our goal should be to shorten learning curves and deliver better outcomes. And remember, most of you here are tier 1 surgeons, you're experts. But a large part of the world are tier 2 and tier 3, and the harm that they may do in revision, you have to live with. And if we can do anything to change that, that's a value creation. So let's disrupt education for a minute. So Halstead said, see one, do one, teach one. And William Mayo said there's no excuse today for the surgeon to learn on the patient. So how do we deal with this? All surgical education is expensive, cadavers, slow, without clear metrics, not directly related to patient-relevant outcomes, and limited by experience. Moore's law has now given us the opportunity to move into the digital world. And Moore's law basically predicts how fast computers work and how much storage they can have, etc. This opens the door for a variety of technologies. And I'll talk briefly about immersive VR. Now, when the golfer is practicing his golf swing, he gets feedback for his biomechanics to optimize the swing. It should be logical that as surgeons, we should have some practicing too. So it has been termed, and now many of you may have seen these different companies creating immersive virtual reality. It's a very different feeling than just what we do on the computer screen. I call it a flight simulator for surgeons. So here's an example, just partly showing how virtual reality may be. I'm showing you in 2 dimensions, but you're inside of it when you're doing this. So you can simulate pathology in 3D, you can do practice operations, and ultimately you may be able to put the actual procedure for your patient or your patient's anatomy into a 3D world and manage your practicing the surgery before you go to the operating room. And so you can see here, you can place the base plate, guide pin too low, too high, and you can practice errors the same way pilots practice errors in order that you should avoid them in the operating room. And base plate insertion, etc. And so this is also a value for industry because you can train reps, if you will, in this environment. And this was done recently, where you can train many, many, many individuals at once in their own virtual world, as you see here. And they feel when they're all done that this improves their understanding of the operation, their ability to then market the product, and it dovetails with the implants that they're selling as well. So this is a separate value proposition because it creates a competitive advantage for industry if they engage with this. At least that's my opinion. This is what they thought about their experience. Now, what's really fascinating is that what if surgeons could work together in the same space without traveling? So we did a session where Danny Goyle was in Vancouver, George Athwal in London, Joaquin Sanchez-Sotelo at Mayo Clinic, and I was at home. And we were all together in a virtual room. And
Damon, Clooney,
I think the sound is turned off. Doesn't matter. These are the 3 of us. What's interesting
they can
is
who they are amongst themselves.
Okay, we'll go from here.
The whole goal is to showcase how George is in London, JP's in Boston, and of course Joaquin's in Rochester, and they're all in the virtual space together.
We can take the humerus out and rotate it in space, look at it from different angles, which will really help when we're actually doing the procedure if we want to.
For your entry point. So one nice feature of the VR space, as you guys can see, is that I can point to Dr. Warner and tell him, where are you making this entry point. That's important. We can collaborate. I can actually take the guide out myself if I wanted to, or move it. This is now Joaquin's hand. I'm going to take it out, and now probably George can do the same thing and manipulate the guide.
It's not too bad.
So if you look here at it, what do you think now, George, in terms of the cut height?
Looks like I did take off a little bit of the lesser, but it's not too bad.
So let's go ahead and do the reaming. The reaming, the reaming with a 3. So as you can see, we can simulate the entire operation. This of course, we can turn this sound off. This, of course, is depending on the company collaboration. And we would love to have a platform that all companies can help you do this, because the data is very clear. The analysis included a study that demonstrated that when compared to just video, there's 570% improvement in execution in the operating room for the residents who did this. And the Academy is very interested in this. They have a task force on this that I'm on. And in time of COVID, this was amplified because we couldn't get together. But now we'll be able to get together on different continents. So the evolution of this has some real advantages. It's realistic, it's inexpensive, it allows motion analysis, allows haptic and sound feedback. You can monitor motion efficiency, you can practice errors and their corrections, you can score your practice, and it allows for remote interaction. So I don't want to leave that off the list because I'll get to mixed reality in my next talk and also a little bit here. Now, if we want to disrupt industry now, it's a different value equation. Every organization needs an augmented reality. This was an article published in Harvard Business Review, a whole issue devoted to this. And this is happening in industry now quite a bit. And we now are somewhat late adopters of this technology because that's what surgeons do. They're not really often on the forefront. So innovation creates value in the physical world by three-dimensional, and most data is trapped in a two-dimensional world. So augmented reality is a set of technologies that superimposes digital data imaging on physical objects and environments, thus closing the gap. AR improves how users visualize information and receive and follow instructions and interact with the products. AR becomes the product, and AR becomes part of the value chain. And this is just a company, it may not show so well here. Yeah, this is a company that has been able to have AR guidance for venous placement. So failure of IV placement is reduced dramatically when you use an AR overlay. Augmented reality, we have already. Basically, it's overlay of virtual objects onto the real world. So when you look with your iPhone, it will be soon, and then soon with glasses, that will give you cues. We'll actually be able to remember people, and when we forget their name, it will come in front of us in a hologram who they are. Now, if we come to virtual reality and we come to augmented reality, there's a reality-virtuality continuum, if you will. And on the left, you see reality, and on the right, you see virtual reality, and in between will be augmented and mixed reality. I just want to comment that I'm sharing with you information from many others. This is not my own ideas. This is real because one company had a relationship with our company. It was then bought by another company, bought by an even bigger company, and now that becomes a major driver of the way we approach shoulder arthroplasty care. And I just wanted again to point out, if you're in a room with people smarter than you, you're probably in the right room. If it's the other way around, you're in the wrong room. So VR planning, at least as we use it, and you've seen the other speakers talk, it's a technological disruption by integrating with surgical planning and execution. And so there are many companies that do this. This is the way I can balance the conflict. Each of them has their own approach. Each of them has varying ability to execute. And we didn't even talk about navigation, which is the core of another company, or robotics, which will be coming for sure in the next 3 years, one company first and then others after. If we look at what the others were speaking about before, what is the influence of three-dimensional planning? Well, this study showed it influences decision-making. So the key is we elevate less experienced people. And in fact, in a study that we did, we identified Tier 3 surgeons become more like Tier 1 surgeons in their planning just by learning 3D planning before they even go to the operating room. That is a value creation because we potentially can reduce their learning curve. Why is this innovation useful? You can predict the implants needed. You can reduce inventory and parts and pieces. That improves your efficiency, lowers cost, and is a better value. And there are a number of papers coming out about that right now. So if we look at supply chain and inventory costs, and we have this on the back table, that's a big backache, but it also is a big issue for companies because in many cases, they deliver close to $100,000 in inventory. That's not good for their supply chain. If you rely on your planning and you believe in your planning, you can do the operation with much less parts and pieces. And as we move towards, at least in our country, we move towards outpatient surgery, this is critical. So if you look at profitability of different businesses, grocery stores, car dealerships, etc., in this reduced income statement here, you can see margins across these, and this may not make this very sensitive to each company, to each country, but you can affect this overhead cost in a great way where it's margin driven. And so this is an article from George Athwal and Gilles Walsh and others demonstrating that preoperative planning does predict component size and anatomic replacement with a high degree of certainty. And then we just finished a multi-center retrospective analysis. And retrospective here is better because if you do prospective, people may manipulate the data. But here, if you look at it after the fact, we demonstrated with anatomical replacement about 100% accuracy in what we actually chose in the operating room. It's also useful because your team can participate in understanding what you're doing and contingency plans, and certainly they like less parts and pieces. So mixed reality, virtual objects are anchored in the real world and interaction is with digital objects in real time. This is George Athwal's video that he was kind enough to give to me. And so you can see, you can look in 3D at what you're about to do in the real world, and you can take this into the operating room as well. You can position that in space. This can be distraction sometimes, but nonetheless, it's a different world we live in now. And so remote surgical assistance is a possibility so that your scrub tech can put on these glasses and can be directed by a rep or someone else not in the operating room to point out what comes next. And many specialties are using this now: rehab, cardiology, neurosurgery, and even stroke management. So if we briefly look at a video of how I might use it at the current time, and this is current, is for referencing, not for guidance. So if I'm referencing here, I can look at the humeral anatomy, I can mark the orientation of my humeral cut. Now, for me, it may not be as important, but for Tier 3 and Tier 2 surgeons, it will help them avoid mistakes. At least I believe that's the case. That is not a study yet. It's a little bit difficult study to talk about people making mistakes, but this is an important point. And so it can guide you with your humeral cut, and this has not been assessed in terms of accuracy yet. It can guide you with placement of the humeral component and the osteophytes that you may remove, as you see here. Now, if we go to the glenoid, which is where it's been more applied currently, you can reference the anatomy where you are with the glenoid itself right next to your referencing, right next to your operating field. And if you use a patient-specific guide, some of the problems are sometimes to put them exactly where they belong, and this helps to do that. Now, I'm not saying that is the end point. That is the beginning. I'll briefly talk about the end point shortly. So really, the future is going to be low-cost navigation, at least with this platform. I can't show you too much, but I can tell you that smart instruments will help guide your placement with no guides, and eventually we would like to create a world where mixed reality is our guidance through navigation rather than what we do currently, which is eyeballing. Now, finish up with AI and machine learning. So Niels Bohr was a famous scientist, and he said prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. And then there are a number of articles on machine learning and economics, because mostly this is an economic question. Artificial intelligence is not new. It is a study how to make computers do things which at the moment people are better at doing. And it has been termed the fourth industrial revolution. And you can see where we've come with this. Now, we differentiate artificial intelligence from machine learning from deep learning. And this requires, as you go to the right, more networking and the computer learning more and more what are the common approaches and how they are working and correlating. Many of you may not have seen this, but this was a wonderful movie entitled AlphaGo. And a Go is a type of game played in the Far East, and it's very, very popular, and it's much harder than chess. So this is where a computer was taught to learn with machine learning how to play this game, and it beat the world champion 5 out of 5 times. Think about the application in surgery. It certainly is there. And it's always good to be early and then time yourself correctly. For those who are really interested in AI, I would suggest to you this book, Deep Medicine, which is very readable and very much written for us, not for engineers. But it basically talks how artificial intelligence can make the major difference in healthcare. Now, AI planning requires artificial neural networks. I'm not an engineer, I won't go into that. The patterning of what we think are B2s and B3s or whatever, this may be solved by AI in a way that it's clear and it's not us debating. And this includes superior erosion. Now, if we look at the way we do planning, it's very interesting that we were shown this plan here. And basically, AI based on patient details and glenoid morphology can select the best treatment potentially in the future. This is one of the things we'll talk about at the Codman meeting. With auto planning, as you see here, this tells us what % of individuals would select an anatomical for this patient given their age and their anatomy. But we can also, now pretty soon coming to you, push a button for auto planning and you put in the criteria for your requirements. What do you believe version should be? You're in control of that. And it will be a value for the surgeon because it automates what they have to do manually now. And so you see at the top is the recommendation, but you have 3 other options depending on what your preference is. And if you select that, then you can go on. And whether or not this is a value either is hard to say, but currently we can optimize range of motion in reverse. The soft tissues may or may not let us complete this, but this is an additional component of the AI. So the promise of AI-driven shoulder replacement surgery is expert input on decisions for treatment. These are experts, all their data being accumulated into this AI model, insight into the best solutions and reduce errors in execution, and continued learning based on evidence-based medicines and expert opinions. So for those who can't read this man is wearing a mixed reality goggle, and he's saying to his one-day son, all this will be yours. Sase Feristo, thank you.
So, JP, you open a big window about the future more than the real present. And this is the first question that is arising from the previous session. How much we can translate this now into the real life in our profession? Because we still have some, let's say, cloudy areas about it. About most of all, the deep learning, I think, I'm doing some studies with my guys, and with the help of engineer, radiologists, blah, 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 because it is a teamwork. This is important to be outlined. It is not just the work done by the surgeon. It is just different competence. Deep learning needs to teach the machine, and it is exactly what Offer said before and we were discussing, how we can teach the machine to help us, because I think this is the link that we are still a little bit missing.
So I'll fumble this a little bit, but again, I'll put the experts' videos up on ViewMedi after we have our Codman meeting because they will address that particular question. You need data, that's all. It's data analytics. You need a lot of data, and then you need time for follow-up. So if you're doing 1,000 cases this particular way, and these ones went to augmented glenoid and these ones went to reverse, and then the machine can see the follow-ups, then it can work backwards and tell you what you should or should not do based on the outcomes of your cases. That, for me, is machine learning that will take us to another place. Because right now, we have opinions. It's pretty good. It lasts a while. We don't do a very good job of measuring the third tier of value, which is durability. You will not see many differences in the first 5 years. There are about 5 million cycles. Things generally don't fail unless you do something really wrong in the first 5 million cycles. It takes the next 5 million cycles and more to see the failure.
Another question for you. What's your opinion about the value of registries for the machine learning process and the evolution?
I'm sorry, say the value of what?
Registries.
Registries, oh yes. Yeah. So, you know, all of this is dependent upon the world in which we live. Everything is in context. Right now, there are added expense for us if we want to do this. This isn't generally being supported. And these companies that create this technology, they have to make a profit. They have a responsibility for their shareholders. So a lot of what you're talking about has to do with the cost barriers and regulatory barriers. Registries are very important, but to be fair, most registries look at inferiority of certain components. They don't tell you superiority. So you must have patient-reported outcomes as part of your machine learning, not just imaging studies and things of that nature. And, you know, we have a registry. Anybody who wants to look at Boston Shoulder Institute, we measure every surgical patient ongoing over the years. It's just hard to keep them giving us information. After 5 years, they tend to go away.
Professor Porcellini, a question?
Because it's incredible. But we had debate about machine learning. If you see, for example, range of motion like this, no pain, and algorithm for good results, and the surgeon,
Hold the microphone higher. Yeah.
the surgeon hasn't the same results. Can you have in USA a problem about medical, legal, and your wonderful lawyer?
Yeah, there are many of these problems, but I would say to you, if a machine can beat a world champion, then a machine can create models for us that will help us take better care of our patients. There's no question, in my way of thinking, that this will happen. We are just always late because of the regulatory environment, the cost issues, but it is 100% coming. And I would invest in that, I have, with no problem at all. I just think that at the end of the day, the more, you can have time or you can have money as a general rule. If we give you back time, you make more money. And so machine learning will give you back much time. And then you'll have solutions, I think, that will be borne out over time. Not that your patient feels well for the first 5 years. It's what happens at 10 years and 15 years and 20 years. So it will take some time for the machine to learn this. But when it does, we'll have a whole different reference point.
Because Italy is a place of philosophy. And so surgery is an art or a science. Because sometimes too much algorithm is too many dangerous, or not.
I mean, I can quote Gilles Val. She said, the problem with surgeons, actually, Christian Gerber first, if two people agree, one is not a surgeon. And then Gilles Val said, if you try to convince people of what you believe, it's the same as trying to convert them from their religion. We all have a different religion here. I don't need a guide, I need a guide, I need planning, I don't need planning. But, at the end of the day, the only antidote to opinion is evidence. And the evidence just needs to be better.
Any further questions from the floor? So thank you so much, JP, for this wonderful view for the future. We need to have imagination. Thank you so much. Thank you.